Hello. We are now entering the second talk of the day, titled Pinkwashing, Rights in Appearance, Oppression in Content. And thank you everyone for being here. I will very briefly introduce you to our speaker today, our guest Samar Zughool, pronouns she, her, who is a political scientist and researcher from Jordan. And she will speak about the origins and mechanisms of pinkwashing and queer decolonial practices of resistance. And thank you in general for Grounded for opening a space to talk about such important topics. Samar, let's get into it because we only have an hour. After much thought and debate, we titled the event Pinkwashing, Rights in Appearance, Oppression in Content. And could you please share your thoughts with us about this title? I know I will share that you felt quite a lot when we decided upon this, and I think it would be a great introduction if you can share a bit of your thoughts and feelings.
Thank you, Linn. Actually, yes, this title resonated with me a lot, and this is because this title, as a definition, is still ethnocentric from a white experience. Because now, in practice, pinkwashing is not a marketing strategy. There is no rights in appearance and no rights in violence. Actually, it is only violence in appearance and in content. The enforcement of militarization on queer identities, the horrible violence of genocide, of Israeli government daring, and this is of course not from now. It is a systematic approach that led us to this moment now, where the settler colonial state is using the queer flag, which was initiated by a real grassroots people asking for freedom and justice and peace from police brutality and freedom and justice for all. They hijack it, they violently took it, and they give it to the arms of the occupation forces to take it and to put it onto the ruins of Palestinians of all genders. And I'm talking here about the recent action from last year, where the Israeli settler colonial genocidal state used an important queer for liberation symbol on the ruins in Gaza. So this is why pinkwashing is a colonial oppressive tool, and there's no rights, neither in appearance nor in content.
Thank you, Samar. Let's break down pinkwashing a bit. What does it entail, and how is it essential, basically, to Israel's approach to politics, and with that, LGBTI politics, if we dare call it that?
It entails a strategic framework and also mechanisms that is not strange or new for queer movements when they are fighting against transphobia, homophobia, and all kind of discriminatory structures. Because it is using this tool that repressive regimes are using, which is dividing human rights into packages. Because human rights, when they are divided by repressive regimes into packages, it is easier to violate them. It is easier to erase Palestinians and then attack the other human rights. This is how repressive regimes works. And we don't have a short memory. We know how homophobic politics and transphobic politics works. They always tried from before to use this approach of divide to conquer, of presenting queer rights as not part of human rights. And even when they also reproduce these narratives of not now. Now we have more important things to talk about. Later we will talk about queer rights and LGBT rights. So this form of dehumanization, this form of divide to conquer, this is what pinkwashing is using as well, which is racism, so producing an essentialist discourse, saying that there's no queer people in Palestine. This is a totally essentialist, racist discourse. And also internalized racism of making us believe, as Arabs, coming from Arabic background, ex-Muslims, Muslims, atheists, to believe that, for example, I cannot be an Arab and a queer person at the same time. I have to give up on one of my identities, and I have to internalize racism and to normalize the genocide of a whole population. Under the ruins in Gaza, people of all genders and all sexual orientations are there. Human rights does not come with bombs. And this is what pinkwashing is trying to normalize, and also singling out some issues from others, so killing our intersectionality as humans, enforcing the militarization on people. Like, if for some people, they don't want to see how the genocide is happening on Palestinians, and this is not to compare, there's no way to compare, but the militarism in the settler colonial state is enforcing anyone who's turning 18 to join a military. And there is a prisoners of conscience, objectors of conscience, who are rejecting to enter the military because they don't want to participate in the genocide of the Palestinians. They don't want to kill the Palestinians. They are sentenced up to 200 days in prison with the repeated sentences. There is no rights on that, and this is how pinkwashing is doing it, dehumanizing us, and also even with this discourse where they tried to where they are still trying to weaponize homophobia. So, for example, tracking Palestinians in the occupied territories through dating apps, and then blackmailing them, weaponizing this homophobia to push them to be informant and to spy for the Mossad. Even this is missing one narrative, because this is not weaponizing only homophobia. It is weaponizing their movement, freedom of movement. It is weaponizing their access to healthcare, their access to basic services. Because, of course, like Al-Qaws, grassroots queer organizing in Palestine said, and before them also other grassroots queer movements, that there is no pink door in the apartheid wall. We need to dismantle the whole apartheid door.
Thank you. We can't really talk about... Yeah. You okay? Yeah. We can't talk about this topic without talking about Zionism. And would you agree that Zionism unjustifiably fuels Islamophobia, and presenting Islam as basically being sexually repressive and discriminatory towards all LGBT plus people and rights? Or thus, could we say that the narrative that they're trying to fuel within us is that Islam has racist understandings of sexuality? What would you think about that?
So, like, first of all, I will answer this question, of course, from my positionality as an atheist and as an ex-Muslim. So, like, I'm an atheist feminist. I started my feminism as an atheist feminist, and then I expanded to decolonial feminism, of course, because it's a must in my process of healing and also collective healing, not only personal healing. And my answer to this question would be, first of all, we have to be anti-Zionism because it's a racist, genocidal ideology. And in the same time, we have to not ally with dictatorial regimes like, for example, the Iranian dictatorial regime, which is an Islamist gender apartheid regime. They always want us to push us in the corner that if you are anti-imperialist, if you are anti-genocide, then you are automatically pro-dictatorial regimes in Iran. This is a crap. And anti-Islamism is not the same as Muslimophobia. Islam is an ideology, could be sometimes interpreted as a socio-political ideology in some constant, but for many it is just a religion. And I just came from Tunisia because I was doing some kind of work with my colleagues there. And there was one book about the history of Islam as a matriarchal alternative to patriarchy. So a whole version of Islam as a matriarchal interpretation of Islam, which was practiced by the Tuareg people in Algeria, in Mali, Tunisia, and other places. So Islam is just a religion that people are using to connect spiritually. And this is part of the dehumanization process. To put all people in one package and to start doing this ethnic profiling, which is Muslimophobia. And in this question that yes, Zionism, especially for example in countries which is still practicing colonialism in our region, like the British, because you know this is how colonization want us to look to history. That colonization finished far and now we are in a new episode. No, we are still living under the British Empire. Even that the British Empire finished, we are still living under it. And the Zionist lobbyists who are lobbying for more and more arm exports to the Zionist settler colonial state, the UK government is as guilty as the settler colonial state in Palestine, giving them the weapons to do this genocide, to do this occupation. And the lobbyists for Zionist ideology in the UK are behind the Muslimophobic attacks on Muslims through ethnic profiling. Innocent people who did nothing in London right now are being attacked. Their shops are being destroyed. This is how Zionism is following Muslimophobia. It is totally to continue the militarization and to continue turning us against each other.
Thank you. Another term that I think is quite essential for us to talk about is homonationalism, coined by Poir. But how does it basically interconnect with pinkwashing? And does it fuel LGBTIQ persons to basically plot one against the other? Like, or does it create a better version of LGBT individuals rather than others, more obedient, more in alignment with what nation states want us to believe that is how we should be?
Well, yeah, Jesper Poir pointed and coined this term in 2007. And of course, in the way that she coined this term, it refers to the concept of exceptionalism. So it is about putting sexuality in an exceptionalist nation state in the cost of marginalizing and the war in terror that the US announced of oppressing the ethnic and the sexual other. And in this scenario, I want us to look into homonationalism also because like how Poir presented it was more of like a conceptual framework which opens a lot of debates and a lot of reflections to be added. And I want us to look at it in two ways. First of all, to rethink homonationalism as a reactionary politics, or this conceptual framework is part of reactionary politics. Reactionary politics, which is known as a conservative politics, which is a politics that wants to keep the status quo. And then to take ourselves back to some prominent or very much well-known queer movements, like in the late 60s, in the beginning of the 70s, the first Pride Parade, which was all in the streets fighting against police brutality, which is mainly it is about black people and people of color being oppressive to them. And how this liberation movement, for example, in the Pink Panther patrols of having also agency that we don't belong to the state and we don't need the state to protect us. We are a grassroots movement of queer for everyone who's facing discrimination. So it was not only about identity politics, it was about recognizing identity politics to dismantle the whole structure that is causing the oppression based on different identity politics. And to think also about the Black Panthers that start also in the 60s and how they also protected black people and all the marginalized to do police brutality, trans people, homosexual, LGBTQI+. So thinking about this strong agency that we had as grassroots movements, where human rights for us don't come in packages, where we don't have selective feminism. Thinking about that, and then thinking how states did not like that, like how I can control them now. Oh, let's come up with homonationalism so we can enforce them into our heteronormative discourse and take their agency. This is the first way I want us to look into homonationalism. So it is not a progressive conceptual framework, that's for sure. It's reactionary to strip us and consume us. And now like, oh, I will fund you, but put my logo. Yeah? I mean, like a whole march by the US Embassy in the Budapest Pride. This is about stripping us and depoliticizing us and turning us to only, you know, it's about kissing my partner in public and that's it. It's not about me being for freedom. It's not about my essential freedom. They are hijacking us. This is a reactionary policy to hijack us. And this is what I want to add to this conceptual framework, to think about it in this way. And of course, this is not to compare, this is just to acknowledge, because if we focus only on this part, then we are so much self-absorbed and self-centered. But I just want us to acknowledge this, especially for the people who's living in the bubble that human rights can be segregated, which is not. But then, of course, homonationalism is the same structure and political attitude, like conceptual framework, of divide to conquer. It is based on creating this illusionary clash of civilizations. It is about betraying Arabs, Muslims, even like atheists like myself, as backwards. And if they are not, then they are westernized. I mean, this is really horrific. I remember that when I was a teenager in Jordan, even before I knew what the West was, I was accused of being westernized. Of like just simply wanting some basic human rights, I was accused of being westernized. This is all because of homonationalism. Because they are reproducing this binary narratives, which is totally anti-queer, of us against them, us against them. And this is how they want to conquer. And taking back into the history. I mean, maybe we can move, because this was also a topic that we want to talk about gender fluidity and homosexuality in the Islamic culture and the Arabic culture. It was not foreign to us. Actually, homophobic laws was brought to Gaza and to Jordan by the British Empire. The British Empire, which is the racist ones, Winston Churchill, the colonial foreign minister. He's a colonial foreign minister, and he has his status in London and Paris celebrated as an icon for the British people. This person who killed millions and millions and colonized all these countries, including the making of Jordan, because he made Jordan, and by making us, he also brought homophobic laws to us in the 30s and to Gaza, and it was in the historical mandate of Palestine. They brought the homophobic laws to us that same-sex between men is illegal. And only after they left Jordan, in 1951, when Jordan started making their own penal codes, they deleted this law. So now, officially by law, we don't criminalize homosexuality. But people, due to their gender identity and sexual orientation, are imprisoned under the ambiguous law of immorality and disturbing the public moral. So people are imprisoned and they are fined just for being queer by look or expressing under this ambiguous law. But this is just, again, not to put all these homophobic laws on like the colonizer, but it's just, again, to dismantle and to debunk this crap about clash of civilization and European values. Like now it's promoted as, let's promote European values. Like, come on. Also, there's some important books, like, for example, for Samar Habib. And this book is about female homosexuality in the Middle East, the title. And it's talking about the history, the art, the literature of lesbian relations in the Arab culture and the Arab history. It's a very important book I advise to read. And the British and the French colonization is the ones who brought to us homophobia. And they brought to us transphobia. Because, for example, like in Egypt, also they brought to us patriarchy. So, for example, in Jordan, let's go back to Jordan. In Jordan, there's a book for Joseph Mas'ad. It's a political scientist, Palestinian Jordanian political scientist, and he's describing the 4 stages of how the British, when they made us, because they made us, Jordan does not exist. They brought to us a royal family, Hashemite royal family. They brought them to us from Hijaz, which is now known as Saudi Arabia. They negotiated with them, what do you need to sell the Palestinians? So we can kill Palestinians and we will give you a dictatorial kingdom that you can rule and rule through your patriarchal monarchy. One king, his son comes. One king, his son comes. And you become our ally. So this is a continuation of imperialism of UK and US imperialism. So they brought to us this royal family to Jordan. And Joseph Mas'ad is explaining how they tried to enforce on us a national identity through 4 stages by imposing a military institution and a law institution. And through imposing the military institution on us, they imposed patriarchy. I'm not blaming only the colonization. Of course, we had some patriarchal aspects, but I am just trying to dismantle the clash of civilization. So this militarism brought, which was male dominant, brought men to power and women as less position. They automatically shaped and changed the culture. It's a very good book to read. And yes, again, well, read the history. In Jordan, homosexuality was like decriminalized in 1951. In UK, it stayed illegal till 1967. So take your clash of civilization and drink it.
Yeah, you being from Jordan obviously has a very, very strong impact on your organizing, your politics, your understanding of how colonialism works. And I would like to ask you, what do you think, how is Jordan positioning itself towards Palestine now? Is it an enemy? Is it an ally? Is that way too binary to even go into that route? Yeah, what do you think about that?
Okay, thank you, Linn. Well, yes. So again, to be able to see this picture, we need to decolonize our perception of time. So now, to understand how this horrible genocide is happening against the Palestinians at this moment, we need to know that this is a continuation of the British colonization and the US colonization in the region. And we need to go back to 1917, which was the Balfour Promise. How many people here know about the Balfour Promise? Great. So the Balfour Promise, Balfour was the Foreign Secretary of the British, and he promised the Zionist organization to create a land or a state for Jews on the land of historical Palestine. This is why British Empire conquered Palestine and the historical Palestine stayed under their mandate. So this Balfour, which is very much well known as a bloody Balfour, known by the Irish people very well, because he was also oppressing all the trials for liberation of Irish people. Bloody Balfour in 1917, promising. Why he did this promise? Because you think he's like, he loves Jews? No. He did this promise because he's anti-Semitic. And there's in the political archive a lot of centimes and phrases that he said about believing in conspiracy, that the Jews are controlling the world, la la la, all these anti-Semitic horrific statements that he did. And then he said, okay, then from my anti-Semitism, I will promise the Zionists to establish this state, so we can avoid that the Jews will come to us after the end of the World War, so we can send them as far as possible. And in the same time, we are gaining allies with the Zionist ideology to win the war. So this was a pure anti-Semitic plan from his side. And to prove my point, Edwin Montagu, in this day, 23rd of August, in 1917, he wrote, he's a Jewish, so let me explain to you who he is. He's a Jewish, and he was the Secretary of State of the British Empire to India. So of course he was involved in the colonial regime. I'm not mentioning him to defending him, even though he was advocating for the Indians' rights to self-governance, and the British government rejected his claims, but still I'm not defending him. But Edwin Montagu in 1917, immediately after this Balfour Promise, as a Jewish, he wrote a letter and he condemned this promise. And he said, as a Jewish myself, I'm afraid that this promise is anti-Semitic, assuming that Jewish people in Britain has in common with France or in Bulgaria is anti-Semitic. You are telling us that the countries where we are living is not our countries, and we have to go somewhere far. I'm afraid this is anti-Semitic. And Edwin Montagu also wrote in this letter that what he wrote this day in 1917, he wrote that I'm afraid this promise that you gave will lead to the displacement of the original native people inhabiting historical Palestine, from Palestinians, Jews, Palestinians, Arabs, Palestinians, Christians, Palestinians, Muslims, of course, Palestinians, atheists. He did not write that in the in the letter, but I'm just saying because I feel like as an atheist myself, we are really not, as an Arab atheist, we are not really covered very well. So yes, of course they existed, they were just not documented. So yeah, that all this anti-Semitic feelings from the British Empire that was in that promise. And then after that, of course, they needed some tools. And then in 1921, Winston Churchill, the colonial minister of the British Empire, made Jordan. And after that, it was Transjordan, the name of it. And then after that, it became Jordan in 1946. And the British continued to lead the army of Jordan till 1956. And they enabled the making of the Zionist state. So our royal, what I'm saying all this history is to answer your question, that our regime, which is a dictatorial regime, which is a constitutional monarchy, so the king has all the power, is explicit and complicit on what is happening right now in Gaza and in Palestine. And then I also want to mention, I don't want to bore you with a lot of details, but what is relevant right now, mostly relevant, that for example, in 2021, the King of Jordan signed a defense through a royal decree. So the government signed it through a royal decree. It bypassed the parliament. There was no discussion in the parliament. They signed a defense agreement with the US imperialist colonial affairs for 15 years. It is not the first agreement, but what is interesting about this agreement, that it gives full access to US arms and US equipment to transfer and to store arms in Jordan. Of course, these arms, which the the Israeli Zionist settler colonial forces are using the US weapons to bomb Gaza. Now, in October 2023, the Arab Organization for Human Rights in London, they give a condemnation. They condemned the Jordanian royal regime for allowing to transfer the US weapons and bombs to contribute to the genocide in Gaza. Of course, the Jordanian government responded and they said, no, this is not true. and we have some laws. So, for example, we have a law that you can be imprisoned for distributing false news. We have this Les Majestés law that if you say anything bad about the royal family or the king, you go for up to 3 years in prison. We have also a law disturbing the reputation of the country abroad. So, of course, yes. So, of course, they can hide this and say, no, there was no US weapons. But they cannot deny that this king did a constitutional amendment against the will of the parliament in 2022 to give the dictator king more power to decide on foreign matters without coming to anyone through the establishment of a council of national security. So now we have it. It is headed by the prime minister, who's appointed by the king, and most of the members are appointed by the king. So now they can decide for us whatever. You saw when also the Iranian regime launched the rockets, the UK and the US troops hunted them down on the land of Jordan. So we are basically going to contribute to any war with the imperialist power, and the people who are opposing, they are going to be shot on the spot. So this is maybe answering the question that yes, it is not a binary thing, but when it comes to the regime, which is a colonial tool for the British Empire, which ended, but its influence did not end, it is a clear thing. The royal regime in Jordan, and also because, there's this Prime Minister, Ayman al-Safadi, who's coming to the Bled Strategic Forum to talk about peace in Gaza and how he's hardly broken and this. We don't want your things that you are saying just to put Jordanian people in numbness. You are explicitly a partner. First of all, you are not elected. You were appointed by the king. And you explicitly defended this defense agreement with the US in 2021, which their weapons are used to kill Palestinians. So keep your emotions for yourself. You are a hypocrite.
Yeah, the stance of Jordan as a nation state is obviously very clear. Thank you for explaining that. But do you have any information, knowledge, what's happening to people who are resisting, who are standing pro-Palestine, who are potentially protesting in Jordan, in the region?
Yes. Well, again, I'm thankful that there are, to some extent, some reports which documents, but they are not documenting everything, because I understand there's also some kind of hiding information. But you can also go to the Human Rights Watch. They are imprisoning peaceful activists who are for free Palestine. And I want to repeat free Palestine, because it's not pro-Palestine, it is free Palestine. There's no two sides here. It's freedom for Palestine. So they are arresting them. And recently, they also expelled students in the University of Jordan and give them punishments for organizing to stop the genocide in Gaza. And also recently, there was 2 people, a mother and her daughter, who were arrested. And as for my knowledge, they are still arrested just because they carried a sign asking where is the royal family from what is happening in Aqsa Mosque, because the royal family is officially based on this normalization, also assured that the normalization treaty that they signed with the settler colonial state of Israel in 1994, Wadi Araba it's called, when our complicit dictator regime signed this treaty with Israel, recognizing or admitting that the Israeli occupation has the right over water that they occupied and now they are controlling. So yes, there are a lot of prisoners of conscience. And also when we say prisoners of conscience, it is interesting because the discourse of the government, for example, the homophobic discourses that is taking place on a political level in Jordan, in the parliament, the transphobic, the homophobic, all these anti-LGBTQI+ discourses, they are referring to us as a Western agenda. And this is, of course, an aftermath of homo-nationalism and also colonizing the history. So we don't understand our history. We don't understand. This is why we need to learn our history, which is rich in queer culture. And they try to produce that. And then it is interesting that as a prisoner of conscience in Jordan, like prisoner of conscience, you can be present for your gender identity, for your sexual orientation, and also as a free Palestine activist. And this government that is accusing us as being westernized, they are the one who's signing all these imperial treaties, giving the land for the imperial powers to divide and conquer and bomb whenever they want. They are bombing Syria from the Jordan land. They are bombing Iraq from the Jordan land. And they are accusing us that we are westernized. And they were even created as a vassal like imposed from a foreigner power. So it is interesting also how prisoners of conscience are very much thinking like it's intersectional. It's again like sexuality and gender, like Mona Tahawi, the Egyptian feminist activist writer. She wrote in her book, Headscarves and the Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution. This is the title of her book, because like gender and sexuality is interconnected with everything else, and there's no way to divide any human rights from another.
I want to acknowledge that I imagine there's a lot of questions for you, so this will be my last question. But trying to look outward and also inward for us as queer people. What do you think, how can LGBT individuals and communities basically develop skills to recognize and reject colonial propaganda within LGBT political efforts and social movements? Because that is inherently racist, and we are then just being aware or not, but contributing to the mechanism that we say we are against.
I think we need to free ourselves and to understand that not by my name or not by our name, this is slogan, it might seem at first glance that it is only for solidarity with another. It is, but it is also a slogan and a movement for self-liberation. So not by our name, we need to reclaim our queerness as a stateless, to break free from institutions and the process of institutionalization, and to get out from the ethnocentric education that was imposed on us by formal institutions or non-formal institutions. So we need to read about the history again, and to need to decolonize our perception of history, that the history did not end, it is entangled with the present. To read for scholars like Samar Habib, Bunat Tahawi, and other scholars that are coming from various backgrounds to challenge this ethnocentric view. And also to create communities. So to join like various communities and not to stick, to understand that identity politics is not about segregating ourselves. It is about recognizing the different forms of oppression that is based on segregating us. And in this way, through identity politics, we can connect for a longer vision, which is dismantling the apartheid wall. So instead of focusing on one door, we would not need a door if there's no wall. So we need to break that. And of course, also to based on our capacity to mobilize, to join. For example, now in the Blood Strategic Forum, there's also the Livni politician from the settler colonial state of Israel. And she was actually wanted for 3 days in 2009 in a court in Britain as a war crime investigation. Of course, not because the British government are nice, because there's a brilliant free Palestine activists who managed to oblige the British, not the British government, but the British court, that this is according to this convention that England signed to combat war crimes. Then she committed a war crime. Then we have to stop her. But of course, this case was there only for 4 days. And then after it, the British government took it out. you know, because international conventions is about human rights for some, but not the human rights for others. So they took it down, and they called her, and they apologized. And then this is something also based on capacities, like for the ones who's going there to point it out or to boycott this kind of events, to call it out, to stop this hypocrisy of feeling sorry, then inviting a war criminal to speak. This is also like advice for an Arabic proverb. It says, don't kill us and then walk in our funeral. This is like, لا تقتلوا القتيل وتمشوا بجنازته. Killing the person and then walking in their funerals. Don't allow them to walk in our funerals. They killed us. So like calling out, connecting, and also, of course, again, these mechanisms of funding, I will fund you, but you will put my logo. It's kind of like conditional. It's like a toxic relationship. I will do this, but you will need to. It is like we become kind of like very much consumed, so we need to find another way. It's either that we find alternative ways of how we can grow in this capitalist world without depending onto this bait, like giving something to take something back, or we need to maybe also like there's some decolonial research on this concept of foreign aid, not to call it foreign aid, but to call it as reparations. So you are. But maybe this is an idea that to investigate, but I'm not sure about it very much because we need to also reflect on it. And yes, so this system of pay and put your logo on me, we need to dismantle it totally, destroy it. They can go and put it on the walls, whatever they want. We will take it off, of course, because this is gentrification, connected to gentrification as well. Whenever there's logos, there's higher prices and people are prohibited. So I think that what we need to follow is to acknowledge and the different forms of oppression without comparing, like just to acknowledge. We are not comparing. We are not competing who's more oppressed than who, but it's just about acknowledging and getting out from our bubbles. And for your capacity, advocate, call out, and make them, there's another Arabic proverb, الحق الكذاب لباب الباب. So follow the liars till the door of their house. Keep telling them, okay, you're, then what, then what, then what? So keep calling them out, yes.
Thank you. Okay, now it's time for questions. The only thing I ask you is that please use the microphone because this is being recorded. No one? Okay. Well, okay.
Yeah. Hello. Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for that amazing, amazing talk. It was beautiful. And second of all, you mentioned briefly about sexual revolution in the Middle East. And I was wondering if you could expand on that and also maybe talk about a few relevant authors that would be helpful to look into if we want to investigate or research this further.
Thank you so much for the question. Yes, sexual revolution is also a sexual revolution against the title Middle East, which was given to us by colonizers. And it is also a democratic in a real form, so not the two-party system representative sheet of democratic that is imported by the US, but it's about freedom and rights and revolution against the colonial legacies. Because the colonial legacies are still there, for example, in Egypt. I want to recall Sarah Hijazi. Sarah Hijazi is a queer feminist activist who raised the rainbow flag in Cairo in 2017. immediately, and even it was like a concert for Mashru' Layla. Mashru' Layla is a 11th band that they are also doing a lot of amazing songs celebrating the queer heritage in the Arab culture. Like they are sometimes singing and quoting Abu Nawas from maybe 6th century or even before, of talking about homosexual love and attraction. And she like raised the rainbow flag in their concert. And based on that, they arrested her, they sexually assaulted her, they tortured her, and she was murdered by suicide in 2020, as she was in Canada. She was there as a refugee. Why murdered by suicide? Because the state-sponsored homophobia and the state-sponsored LGBT phobia kept the media sponsored by them. They kept hunting her down while she was in exile, until it led to her murder by suicide in June 2020. And there's like one documentary movie about the queer revolution in the Middle East. I will also maybe put it, because I think this interview is recorded, so I can put also the resources of Muna Stahawi books and other also feminists from our region to read about under it. But I want to say, to give a concrete example of how when we are doing sexual revolution, we are also doing an intersectional revolution in our region, which is fighting the legacies of colonization and also dictatorial regimes like Al-Sisi or our royal family regime. So, for example, this is Al-Ghawazi. I like to say they are my ancestors. And my ancestors, they were belly dancers. And they were belly dancers who were known as Al-Ghawazi because Al-Ghawazi means the occupiers. And belly dance is a strong part of my heritage. And they were in Egypt practicing their art, their identities as Wamksan belly dancers. But the Orientalist literature, which you can find also in the online archive, was describing them as a debauchery, sexual debauchery. Can you believe it? These women dancing by their own without a man. So vulgar. And look to our dance in France, how a man controlled the woman's body, and these women are dancing by themselves. Such a terror. This is the words from Orientalist literature, how they were portraying my ancestors as a sexual debauchery, but just because they are dancing without a man. This is the same power right now that they're accusing us of being patriarchal. And one of them, which is Klot Bey, because of course when we are talking about colonization, we need to admit that it's taking more than one, not only the colonial power, but also the Egyptian regime at that time in the 1080s, which is Muhammad Ali. He hired Klot Bey, invited him as a sergeant-in-chief for the Egyptian army. And Klot Bey was giving a lot of advices for the Egyptian government at that time about how to do, and he had a lot of views. You can find them also in the online archive. I will post them. He had a lot of this online archive also condemning these dancers. It's such a horrific attitude, very much uncivilized, la 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 la. And surprisingly, they keep talking about this clash of civilization and Islam and la la la. But Jamiat Al-Azhar, the University of Azhar in Egypt, it's one of the most prominent universities that is also doing a lot of Sharia laws. Muhammad Ali sent the first group of clerks he did not send them to Saudi Arabia or to that area that was not called Saudi Arabia yet. But he did not send them to Mecca. He sent them to France to learn from the French civilization how to civilize us. And the leader of this group, of these Islamic clerics, young scholars, his name was Rifa' al-Tahtawi. He went into this visit to France and he was fascinated. He wrote exactly the same views as the colonialist. He wrote the same views and he even introduced a book on it. And in this book he's writing, wow, in France, he embodied the Clot Bay views on Al-Ghawazi, on my ancestors. He said, wow, in France, the dance is kind of like a jump. Man jumping with a woman. But in our country, women are dancing alone, like in a very vulgar way. We are so much sexualized. We have a lot of sexual like freedom for women. And he wrote this in his book. He was condemning the Ghawazi dancers, the women Ghawazi dancers. He launched his book in 1834. Do you know what happened that year? Muhammad Ali banned my ancestors. Here are they. He banned them from dancing in Upper Cairo. And there was also some kind of research that is talking about the taxation system, the enforcement on taxation system. But the prominent reason was the French views on us dancing alone as a dangerous phenomena. And Muhammad Ali adopted it. And now we are coming back to 2 years ago. These two young women in 2021 were sentenced to 2 years in prison. What is the accusation? Same like Clot Bay said. Yes, same like Clot Bay said. They were arrested because of their TikTok account. They are spreading immorality. Because of colonization in 1834, they are banned because they are debauchery sexual objects. And today, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, is the same. This is what is a sexual revolution is. And the laws that was used against Sarah Hijazi to imprison her, they used the same laws of counter-terror. Like she's participating, and also they arrested like around 73 people who were not even like in the concert, but they just found them through gay apps, and they arrested them with the same laws of counter-terrorism. And what I want to say as well, right now, because, so this is when we are doing this, it's an intersectional, because when they attack one based on freedom of speech, they will attack everyone. They will attack you, queer, not queer, how you identify does not matter. They are just, it's a forms of repression. And this is also what I had to learn in Jordan, that in dictatorships, there's no women's rights. There's nothing called state feminism. State and feminism does not meet. As I was in Jordan, of course, like I remember my mother was always telling me, please don't go to protest. We don't want to visit you in prison. Please don't do this. Please don't do that. So I was going to non-governmental organizations to express, to mobilize through non-governmental organizations. They were literally telling us, you can talk about sexual harassment, don't talk about freedom of speech, don't talk about democracy, don't mention the royal family. They were giving us the red lines for it. So there's no women's rights under dictatorship. There's no LGBT rights under imperialism. Oppression is oppression everywhere. And I just want to also mention that in this, how imperialist powers, I know we are running out of time, but I want to mention how imperialist powers are like polishing the image of dictatorial regimes based on their interest. So Saudi Arabia government, they have a delegation of the Human Rights Assembly in the United Nations. They can do that. Jordan is a progressive regime. I mean, in Jordan, in Sharia courts, I cannot be a witness because I'm a woman. So I go to the court and they tell me that you need to bring another woman to become a witness, or bring a man that equals you at 2. This is the progressive regime just because they are signing the imperial things with you. And then we also still have one law called 99. And judges are using these laws. And it's also documented by Human Rights Watch. I always have to mention because, you know, we are hunted by spreading bad news. So I always have to say the organization, the resource. So we still have the article, which is 99. And it is saying that judges are using this to give mitigated sentences of any male relative who's killing any female relative because of some reasons that like disturbed the reputation of the family and this kind of things. And also we have the Article 340, which is giving mitigated sentences for husbands or for any male relatives if they kill the woman who can be any female relative because of unlawful bed, like committing any kind of romantic or or sexual relations without marriage. So it can be like a husband or any male relative. We also have the custody laws. So for example, in case of divorce, women have hadana, which means caregiving, but man has wilaya, which means guardianship, to guardian how his ex-wife is raising the children. He can always say, this is not polite or this is not moral enough, I take them. And she's like a caregiving. This is all like hidden. And when the imperial powers wants to perceive something as progressive, they do. And when they want to rule it down in the ground, they do. And I want to mention before we end something also very important about the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime would not be in power now without the British, the M16, the UK Secret Intelligence Service, and the CIA. How this happened, and I can prove it. Because in 1952 and 1953, the prime minister, which is Mossadegh in Iran, he was secular and elected. And once he got to power, what the first thing he did? He nationalized the oil companies, which was taken by the UK and the US. He nationalized it, and he said it has to be for the people living in Iran. Just 1 year, they organized a coup d'etat. They put him down, and they put the Shah, the Pahlavi. The Pahlavi who was totally pro-westernizing the natural resources in the country. So he denationalized, and he gave all the oil company for the UK and the US. Till 1979, leftists, atheists, secularists in Iran, they all were frustrated. We are like totally under imperialism. And then it was hijacked by Khomeini and the Islamist extremist movement, and they created the Islamist gender apartheid regime now. So what colonization does, they interrupt our collective healing process. How would it be now in Iran? We never know if it was not interrupted, but it was. So this is what colonization does. Interrupting our collective healing process, and this is what our revolution does. Sexual, gender, intersectional, human rights are never to be divided. Thank you so much.